Welcome back to The Explainer. Today we're diving into a really interesting question in contract law. What happens when someone does a job, but it's not quite perfect?
So let's kick things off with a simple scenario. It's something I think we can all picture. But the legal answer? Well, it might not be what you expect.
Okay, picture this. You hire a decorator. They do an amazing job. The place looks great, but they missed one tiny little thing. Maybe a single doorknob wasn't painted quite right. So here's the question. Do you have to pay them the full amount?
I mean, it seems kind of petty to hold back thousands of dollars over a tiny mistake, doesn't it? But then again, a deal's a deal. They didn't exactly do what they promised. And believe it or not, this isn't just some random thought experiment. It's a real legal puzzle with a pretty wild history.
All right, so let's get into it. We're going to look at the old school, super strict answer to this question. For a long time, the law had let's just say a very harsh and simple response.
So way back when, the law operated on something called the entire obligations rule, and it was incredibly rigid. The logic was basically this. If you promise to do a whole job, then you don't get a single penny until that job is 100% done. No exceptions.
And the most famous, and frankly the most dramatic example of this rule in action doesn't involve a decorator at all. It's a pretty tragic story about a sailor on a long, dangerous sea voyage way back in 1795.
Okay, so there was this sailor, a Mr. Cutter. He agrees to work on a ship sailing from Jamaica all the way to Liverpool. The deal was a lump sum payment, but only upon arrival. He does his job diligently, works hard for most of the trip, but then, tragically, he dies just a few weeks before the ship makes it to port.
So his widow, understandably, asks for the pay for the work he did do. I mean, he'd completed almost the entire journey, right? It seems only fair.
The court's decision was brutal. She got nothing. Zero. Not a single pound. And the reason? The contract was for the entire voyage. Since he didn't finish it, even though it was obviously not his fault, the deal wasn't fulfilled. The performance wasn't 100% complete. So no payment. Harsh, right?
Okay, so that's pretty tough. But what's really fascinating is how the law started to change. People realized that this all-or-nothing approach could lead to some seriously unfair situations.
So, over the years, the court started thinking, maybe this entire obligations thing is a bit too much. They knew it could cause real injustice, so they started creating some really important common-sense exceptions to kind of soften the blow.
And two big ideas came out of this. First, there's a rule with a fancy Latin name, de minimis, which basically just means the law doesn't sweat the small stuff. A tiny, insignificant mistake, we're going to ignore it. But the second idea, this is the real game changer, the doctrine of substantial performance.
Okay, so the key here is telling the difference between these two things. On one side, you've got substantial performance. Think back to our decorator. The job is pretty much done. The mistakes are minor. So yeah, they get paid, just minus the small cost of fixing those little errors. But on the other side, you have partial performance. This is like a famous case with a faulty heating system that basically didn't heat. The problems were huge. The court said, nope, this job is not substantially done, and the contractor got nothing.
And this chart really breaks down that decorator case perfectly. The total contract was for £750. The court figured out it would cost about £55 to fix the little things that were wrong. So, what was the final payment? Simple math. 750 minus 55. The decorator got £695. See? That feels a whole lot fairer.
All right, but that's not the only trick up the law's sleeve. There's another clever way courts get to a fair result, and this one is all about how the contract is set up from the very beginning.
So sometimes, the law lets us look at a contract not as one huge single job, but as something that's divisible. You can almost think of it like a series of smaller, separate mini-contracts all wrapped up in one big agreement.
Here's a great example. There was a case where someone ordered a bunch of men's suits, and they were supposed to be delivered in batches. Well, one of those deliveries came up one suit short. The buyer tried to use that one mistake to cancel the whole entire deal. But the court said, no way. Each delivery was its own separate, divisible obligation. Messing up one small part didn't torpedo the whole thing. The seller still had to be paid for all the deliveries they got right.
And this actually brings us right back to our poor sailor, Mr. Cutter. This is why his case ended so badly. The key detail was that his pay wasn't weekly or monthly, it was a single lump sum for the entire voyage. That made it one big, indivisible promise. And because it was all one piece, it had to be completed, all in one piece.
So, after all that, what's the bottom line? Where does the law actually stand today when it comes to doing a job perfectly?
Well, the starting point is still pretty much the same. A deal is a deal. You're expected to do what you promised. As you can see here, that idea of certainty, of people being able to rely on contracts, is still super important.
But, and this is a big but, that strict old rule has been softened. We now have these common sense exceptions that create a much better balance with how things work in the real world. Things like substantial performance and divisible contracts bring fairness and flexibility into the picture.
At the end of the day, what this all shows is this constant push and pull within the law. On one hand, you have the sanctity of contract, the idea that promises must be kept. But on the other, you have the messy, imperfect reality of business and life, where things don't always go 100% according to plan.
So it really leaves us with one final practical thought for all of us. The next time you make a deal, really think about how it's structured. Is it one giant, all-or-nothing job? Or can you break it down into smaller, separate pieces? Because as we've seen, that simple choice could make all the difference in the world.